Powerful words. Once again, let's give a little context. What's going on? Who is Jesus speaking to, and what is this all about? Because it carries great weight. It's a burden for we Christians to hear these words, I think. This is a continuation of Jesus' teaching on the plain. You'll remember last week, he identified his disciples through the Beatitudes. And he blessed them. The poor, the hungry, the disenfranchised, the people that lived on the margins in his time have been drawn into the center of his ministry. And he blessed them. And those that would eventually accuse them and abuse them, he offered the woes to. So he had blessings and woes, if you all remember that. Well, this is a continuation, and this is the teaching by Jesus to his disciples and those that were surrounding him, thousands, about what it means to behave and to respond like a Christian. What it meant for the disciples. He was giving them this burden to carry as those who would go into the world to pronounce the risen Lord eventually, and before that, the good news of Christ. In summary, and you find it buried in one of the lines there, as your Father does, is the summary of what he's talking about. Our God is a loving God. Our God, and we heard in the other reading, will encounter those who might even hate God. I've run into people like that. They're angry with God. And I always rejoice in that because they still believe in God, and he is big enough, they are big enough to shoulder the burden. I might not be, but the Creator certainly is. That being that Jesus referred to as his Father in heaven. And Jesus is saying, be like God. Offer mercy like God when it seems that mercy should not be given. Offer hope like God when it seems to be a moment of hopelessness. Love like God even though they don't love you. That's right. We often, and he goes on to say, what profit is it to love somebody that loves you? I mean, we should, of course, but is that going to make you a saint? No. What profit is it to lend somebody you know that's going to pay you back with that expectation? In those days, money lending between individuals or family groups was a common thing, and Torah dictated how much you would pay back and when often. Torah would also dictate that there was a year of Jubilee when all debts were forgiven, all slaves freed, and your land went fallow for the year so that the hungry could eat. Jesus is providing his Torah to his disciples. Getting drawn into hate is a very easy thing to do. We are living in a very polarized world right now. What we have learned to do is what's called a zero-sum game. Has anybody ever heard that phrase? You know what it means? Well, even if you do, they don't, right? So, zero-sum simply says, if you're right, I must be wrong. And if you're wrong, you're a bad person. And we're getting more and more like that. We are moving into social tribalism. because we want to surround ourselves with like-minded people. And there is indeed some safety in this. I would suspect that somebody who is identifying as transgender likely will not go to a rally of ultra-conservatives. Probably won't, unless they want to act up. We know that certain actors and actresses who are trans are already receiving abundant hate through social media and emails and texting. And what should we do? I'll tell you what we normally do. We get sucked right into it. I've done it before on Facebook. It took me years to learn not to do it, but I'd start arguing with somebody on Facebook. And I want to tell you as an aside, that's the dumbest thing you can do. You're probably not going to change their mind, and all you're going to do is get the other people that read it worked up, and they might get sucked right into the argument, because we want to be right at what cost. Jesus is saying, don't get sucked into it. Don't get drawn into their anger and anxiety. Don't get drawn into their disparagement. Stand with dignity and integrity, and perhaps even a bit of aloofness, if that allows you to still love them. So I'm going to tell you about Gracie May. Who's Gracie May? Gracie May is my personal German Shepherd. I can show you her hair on my black legs right here. I can't get out of the house without, I've got a roller in the car. If you watch Facebook, there's stories about people that own German Shepherds and giant balls of fur rolling across the living room. Now, I love Gracie, and Gracie loves me. Gracie is arrested. Gracie was caged probably for about 3 years in a puppy mill as a puppy mommy. And she somehow chewed her way out of that cage. She's got some broken teeth up front. And she lived on her own for a period of time, I don't know how long, in downtown Dallas, running and hiding from me. And some workmen found her in an open lot, and they fed her, but she would not come close. Food was not going to build a relationship with Gracie May. Why? Because she had been so horribly abused. To this day, if I get a garden hose, she runs out of the backyard into her bed, next to my bed, and curls up and hides, just because I touched a garden hose. So we can imagine what that garden hose means. It means somebody came down an aisle, she was in a cage with maybe a cement floor, a dirt floor, they sprayed the poop down and her too. And maybe we thought it was funny to spray her and hurt her. Now, Gracie May has been with us for 3 years plus. She now comes out of her corner. She will even come out when people come to visit and go around and sniff you, sometimes inappropriately. And she's gaining trust, but if someone bursts through the door and she doesn't know them, she stands about 10 or 15 feet away, and she looks like every wolf terror you've ever imagined. Her face wrinkles up, she barks loudly and aggressively, she growls, and she kind of does this. She gives you the side eye. So, if you're new and just encountering her, what might you think? She is a mean, vicious, aggressive dog. No, she's terrified. She's afraid. And that's the only way she knows to say, give me my 10 feet. Vicki and I have often talked, if somebody broke in the house and was beating me to death, would Gracie May come up as an attack dog and save my life? She says yes. I say absolutely not. She'll stay 15 feet away and look vicious. Now, I'm telling you that story to tell you that we don't know what's going on in the hearts and minds of our perceived enemies, those who stand apart from us. We don't know what their experience is that brought them from there to here. We usually don't. Sometimes we can make some assumptions, but you know what assumptions do, right? The old axiom, they make an ass out of you and me. So we got to set aside assuming and meet people where they are, is what Jesus is saying, and not get drawn into their anxiety. It's kind of hard to do, but it is also successful. It is successful on a corporate, that means all of us acting as one body level, as well as an individual level. Here's another story. They tell you preaching stories are good. So here's another story. It was about 6 years ago, and many of you all may know that there is a pride parade. 6 or 7 years ago, one or two churches, kind of at the end of the parade, and this is going to sound like a bad joke, you had 6 Episcopalians, 4 Methodists, and 3 Jews marching to say, we stand with you as allies. Now, this isn't about affirming or non-affirming or any of this. This is a story about meeting hatred and how a response was to it. As we marched down these very crowded streets in the quarter, they were packed. I was overwhelmed with that. And I wore my clergy shirt as a sign and symbol to this gathered crowd. And people would run up to me out of this crowd and hug me, big hugs, bear hugs, and say, thank you for being here. Oh, it's so great that you're here. And I found that embarrassing. I don't understand what happened. Why would I be here? Wouldn't I just soak up all the love? I found it embarrassing because I must have represented something to them that was unique and should have been. The church should have always confessed what we heard today, love. Not disparagement, not marginalization, but deep and profound and abiding love. And we do that by opening our doors. And so I was embarrassed for my faith, not my faith, but for the religious structures that had caused this pain to so many people. And then that was compounded a bit. The story's not over. I don't march anymore. I got old. But my heart's with them. We got a lot of young priests in the diocese, and they march. That's a good thing. Well, it happened on that particular march that Shannon Manning was with us. Now, Shannon is a tall, slender redhead. If you know anything about redheads, don't mess with them. I'm just, the rumors about redhead temper are absolutely true. Believe it or not, underneath this gray hair is red hair. And she, like me, was, kind of absorbing all this was going on. We finally hit that corner. That corner that had those signs. That the self-righteous group was saying God hates fags with these signs. I'm sorry if that sounds offensive, because it is offensive. And it said a lot worse. And they were chanting that you're going to burn in hell. And for a moment, there was only their voice, and the crowd had gotten a little silent around them. You could hear a few boos and things like that, a little pushback. But the hatred started rolling, because it was hatred. It was not a theological position. It was hatred for the unknown. Okay? And then Shannon shouted out very loudly, "Love wins." Right? Love, simple. Love wins. And then we clergy started shouting with her, "Love wins." And within 15 seconds, there was such a chorus of "Love wins" that you could not hear the silence of hatred that was unfolding. Because love wins. Love is definitely a theological statement about who our Creator is and who Jesus Christ is and what He brought into the world. And this is His instruction. Have you ever met somebody on and that's sort of the corporate view of love. So what do you do if you meet somebody one-on-one? And I've run into it a couple of times. I don't know what's going on in their lives. Sometimes, and it will happen, used to happen to me with young kids, maybe 10 years old, from Central City and from the 7th Ward. I'm talking about kids living in poverty, call it ghetto, call it whatever you want, but they were living in deep poverty. Now, those kids would come to us after school. And we would spend 3 to 4 hours with them. And many of them would have meltdowns, get angry like that. And boy, the stuff that came out of their mouth. Now, as a middle-class, white, straight guy, it was pretty offensive. Hey, that's who I am. I don't pretend I'm not. That was offensive. But then I came to realize, I went on a tour of a place up in Baton Rouge that does a lot of work with these kids. And what I learned, I had to be taught, and that's a shame, because that means I'm not living into what we just heard. I had to be taught that those children wake up hungry, desperate, with parents often who are not very nurturing or loving, or at least one parent. That's how they start their day. And it doesn't get any better through the school system that tends to ignore them or overlook them, such that by the time they hit 8th grade, they test as illiterate. And they're angry. They're carrying so much with them when they come into this wonderful little church, so much that the least encounter can cause explosive behavior. Now, if they're a bunch of suburban kids, you walk them on the butt and tell them to behave. But that's not going to work with them, because their butt's been whopped since they got up in the morning. Proverbially. And showing them love about 1 second and telling them that there is another way to present themselves won't work that one time. But I gotta tell you, I'm here to testify, Jesus, it works over me. That young lady came in, boy, she let me know what was right once. She was 7 years old. She's now graduating from Xavier University with honors. And she did the work. What we did is give her space to be loved and to be heard. There's another example of corporate behavior. Individual behavior is another thing. Have you ever run into somebody that was really angry with you? Sometimes somebody that was maybe at a fast food restaurant or at a counter barista, and you got offended by their behavior because they were snippy. I know that you all have had that experience because it happens to me a lot, and I think I'm just average. And one time I drove up to a McDonald's in just south of Memphis. Now, my family and I had been driving almost all night from Wisconsin. Now, if you've ever driven through the middle of Illinois and a chunk of Arkansas, that is the most depressing drive that God has ever created. There's also a speed trap outside of Cairo, Illinois, just letting you know. And I ordered, and she said, food? 4 Whoppers? 4 Big Macs? All right, give me a minute. I'm kind of, ooh, geez. Remember, I've been driving 10 hours through Illinois. And it occurred to me in a moment of grace to behave like God and Jesus does. And I looked at her and I said, you're having a hard day, aren't you? You're having a bad day. And like that, she said, yeah, I am. I want to thank you for coming by. Here's your food. God bless you. I had a 4-year-old tell me this morning at Mount Olivet, what is Jesus talking about? And she basically said, don't get sucked into their anxiety. Stand with integrity. Be who you are. Don't let their anger be your anger. That's what it says. Don't let their hate turn you into a hater. Despite haters gonna hate. Good song. But Jesus tells us, don't get sucked into those temptations that will turn you into a hater. Remember that you are loved, that you are cared about, that maybe at some point in your life you were on the margins, and this wonderful hand reached out to you and said, I love you. Come, sing with me, be with me, pray to and with me. Be with me because I am always with you. Always. This is an always moment. When you run into haters, let that be the always moment. Remind yourself that you are part of the beloved community and that you can love in the face of hate. That doesn't mean folding up your tent and not giving resistance to harmful things that may be happening in society, whatever they may be. But it determines how you respond rather than responding. Remember, we responded to a verbally violent crowd by saying love wins. We resisted, but we used love to resist. Hate cannot exist when love is present. And you are Christ's love.